You're in your first season as a Division I head basketball coach at Duke. It's late in the season and you're playing a home game against UNC. There are 8 seconds left in the game and you're up by 3. UNC is inbounding the ball on the sideline in their own front court. You have 11 team fouls, so UNC is in the double bonus. As the head coach, you have to make a decision whether to foul or defend on this possession. What choice do you make? We'll get to that answer at the end of the video, but I asked ChatGPT 8 other basketball coaching questions. From X's and O's to analytics to in-game strategy, there's a wide range of coaching topics covered in this video. If you're new here, my name is Jordan Sperber. I've worked on the coaching staff of 3 different Division I programs in my career and done private consulting for about a dozen others. I'll use what I've learned in those past experiences to evaluate just how good Coach GPT is at answering technical basketball questions. Ultimately, we're trying to answer one thing. Does AI really know ball? If you're a coach yourself, I recently created an online basketball analytics course with my friend Ken Pomeroy. The link is in the description. Almost every college coach upon getting hired talks about how they want to play a fast and up-tempo style of basketball. But what about Coach GPT? You're in your first season as a Division I head basketball coach. You have to decide what type of offense you're going to run in year 1. What type of pace are you going to play at? Coach GPT's answer is that it wants to be a middle pace team. Push off turnovers and long rebounds, but flow into half-court offense when an obvious advantage isn't there. Coach GPT also talks about how it will play faster in the future when it gets its preferred recruiting classes into the program, which makes me wonder if it hasn't heard of the transfer portal. It's never been easier to overhaul a roster in year 1 on the job, especially if you have NIL resources. The days of building through freshman recruiting classes are kind of over, not for all programs, but for a lot of them. As far as the correct answer to the pace question, the truth is it was kind of a trick question. This graph plots pace compared to offensive efficiency during the 2025 season. As you can see, there is no correlation between the 2 variables. In other words, you can win playing fast or win playing slow. Alabama was the fastest paced team last season, Drake was the slowest. Both teams made the NCAA tournament regardless. If I was a head coach, my focus wouldn't necessarily be on playing fast, but it would be on avoiding late clock situations. Offenses shot just 24% from 3 and 38% from 2 in the last 4 seconds of the shot clock last season. We would want to avoid those instances as much as possible. Okay, next up I asked that if you had an elite 3-point shooter on your team, what are 3 offensive actions you would run to get him looks? Be as specific as possible. Now we're getting into some real X's and O's talk. Coach GPT says it would use floppy action, Spain pick and roll, and hammer action for the shooter. Let me show you each of them. Floppy is a pretty old school action where a shooter starts under the hoop and runs off of screens along the baseline, reading the defense to find the open space. It was perfected by Rip Hamilton and the Pistons, but it's kind of gone out of style in the NBA and college, I think for a couple reasons. First, defenses are more likely to just switch all the screens now, making the action less effective. And second, it can lead to a lot of long mid-range jumpers. John Calipari is the coach I can think of that still uses this style of offense the most. Spain is a 3-player action where the shooter sets a back screen while a ball screen is occurring. It's very popular in the NBA and college right now. Here you can see Franz Wagner is playing the role of the shooter setting the back screen, and he pops to the top of the key for the 3. That's how Coach GPT wants to use its shooter. And finally, hammer is when the offense sets a screen for a shooter to flare into the corner. It was supposedly named after Darvin Ham, but the Spurs were the team to popularize it. All 3 of these actions are certainly acceptable ways to get a shooter open, but they're kind of obvious, and I'd say Coach GPT is lacking some offensive creativity. I'd rate the answer a B-. How would you coach shot selection? What types of shots would you be looking to generate for your players? Would you let them shoot mid-range jumpers? In today's game, most teams are trying to generate shots at the rim and open threes. And Coach GPT is no different. It says it would literally put rim three free on the wall of the locker room. As for mid-ranges, it said they would only be allowed under special circumstances. In late clock situations, when a true mid-range killer is on the floor, or if the defense is forcing you into them. That last part about special circumstances is important. Yes, mid-range jumpers are inefficient compared to shots at the rim or threes. The NCAA average on mid-range shots last season was 38%, meaning they led to 0.76 points per shot. You're not going to win many games with that level of efficiency. But there are examples of teams having success relying on mid-range. Houston had the 8th highest mid-range volume of any team in the country last season, yet they nearly won a national championship. The Cougars were a bad two-point shooting team, but they made up for it by being great at not turning the ball over and offensive rebounding. So you can still be successful shooting a lot of mid-range, even though it is true that in a vacuum, shots at the rim and threes lead to higher efficiency, and more teams have adopted that philosophy as a result. When creating your defensive scheme, how would you guard the ball? Would you force the ball to a certain direction, and if so, what direction, or would you play square? Coach GPT has a strong opinion on this one, saying it's firmly in the no-middle camp. It also talks about having a low man in position to help, so the AI does seem to understand basic no-middle defensive principles. The part that sold me on why this is a well thought out answer is it says we're not opening up and giving baseline, we're containing it and keeping pressure on the ball. If you watched my last video on the charge rule, you already know that's how most no-middle defenses are now playing. They're still not letting the ball get middle, but they're also just not outright letting the driver go baseline to the basket. I think that's a pretty good way to play defense. Let's switch over to see how Coach GPT does with in-game adjustments. I started with an easy one. Now the season has started and you're coaching a game. Your opponent keeps going under ball screens when you set them on the perimeter. What do you do to counter the defense's strategy? I was really looking for one particular answer when I asked this question because it's what the vast majority of coaches are going to talk about when the defense is going under, the rescreen. Sure enough, that's the first suggestion Coach GPT gives. By rescreening the under, now the second screen is going to be set closer to the basket, making it harder for the defense to go under a second time while still keeping the ball out of the paint. So the AI passes this test, but let's up the difficulty a little bit. Now during another game, your opponent is double teaming the ball every single time it goes into the post. What do you do to counter the defense's strategy? Number 4 on this list is the skip pass, and that's probably the obvious and simple answer. But I want you to focus on number 2 because it's the first thing I outright disagree with. Split action is common when the ball goes into the post. The player who fed the post will meet the player next to him at the elbow. Then it's a read from there, either to use the elbow screen or reject it. The problem is it can be a slow developing action. If that double team is coming immediately, now you have 2 players who are preoccupied with the split cuts. Personally, I'd rather just maintain spacing. But a cut that I do like against the post double is when a weak side player flashes to the middle of the paint. It forces the defense to make a decision, sink to the cutter or stay out on shooters. However, Coach GPT didn't mention that type of cut at all. Next, I tried a more open-ended strategical question. As a coaching staff, you want to be on the cutting edge of analytics and strategy. Give me one example of an in-game strategy you would implement with your team to potentially create 1 or 2 extra points of expected value per game. There are several options here, but it decided to go with the 2-for-1. Coach GPT says it will go in 2-for-1 mode when there's between 40 to 47 seconds on the clock. There are a couple possible problems here. Ken Pomeroy did a study years ago that found the 2-for-1 only adds about 1/5 of a point in expected value for college teams, much less than the 1 to 2 points I asked for in my prompt. Also, a good chunk of teams now use what I call the 2-for-1 killer. In college, the clock doesn't stop after a made basket in the first half, so teams deliberately wait to inbound the ball and ruin the chance of the 2-for-1. Does that mean going 2-for-1 doesn't add any value? No, it does, but it's not as high value as Coach GPT seems to think. Let's say you're coaching a game and your team is down by 3 with 20 seconds left. You have the ball coming out of a timeout situation. What play do you call? Do you go for a 2 or a 3? Announcers love to tell us that the team trailing doesn't need a 3 here, so I was curious what AI would say. It turns out the answer was a bit of a cop-out. If Coach GPT has a great shooter, it would go for the 3. If it doesn't, it would go for the 2. Personally, I think you have to at least run your primary action for a 3 in this situation. Does that mean shoot the 3 no matter what? No, if the defense overreacts to the 3 and you can get a high percentage 2, you may have to take it since time is of the essence. But I'm thinking 3 first. One play that coaches love to run here is where they bring a shooter out from the corner to the middle of the court and then set a crack screen to get that shooter a 3. That would be something to look at in this situation. And that brings us to the question that started this whole thing out. Should you foul or defend up 3 with 8 seconds left? Right off the bat, Coach GPT makes a mistake. It says a key factor to consider is the double bonus, but if you read closer, it doesn't seem to understand what the double bonus rule actually is. Fouling in the act of shooting has nothing to do with the bonus. If we scroll down, the choice is to defend instead of fouling. That might surprise you because fouling is often perceived as the analytically superior strategy, but most research on the subject has shown that the two strategies are actually relatively equal. That's mainly because the offense shoots an average of just 21% from 3 in these situations. It's easier to defend the 3 when you know your opponent needs one. That being said, if you can time your foul to come with about 5 seconds left, it does become a significantly more powerful strategy than if you're fouling earlier than that. The thing I like about the answer here is that it even goes a step further and says how it would defend. Switching all screens, which most coaches do when they don't want to give up a 3, and not helping off shooters. That's an important part of the defend strategy. Overall, I'd say ChatGPT has decent knowledge of basketball tactics and strategy. I wasn't really able to outright stump it or just get it to make random stuff up. But I also wouldn't say that it's good at coming up with cutting edge ideas or things I've never seen before. At this point, it's probably not a whole lot different for what you would find by Googling or searching on YouTube for these topics. But it could save you some time by consolidating these ideas into one response instead of having to read multiple articles or watch multiple videos. At least for now, I think coaches are safe from the impending robot takeover. If you want to learn more about these late game decisions and strategies, I created a basketball analytics course with Ken Pomeroy that is now available for purchase. In module number 9, Ken walks you step by step through the math behind the best in-game strategies. The course provides real data and statistics on relevant coaching topics, but also gives you a framework for how to conceptually think through decisions. You can use the promo code YouTube at checkout for a discount.